Hello world. It's Thursday the 26th of January 2023 and we're looking at the forecast for Soaring from Worcester tomorrow, Friday the 27th. Quick look at the T5 for Worcester for 2 o'clock. Looks quite a lot like today's weather looked. It's a hot day, over 32, 33. As an inversion, it's quite high at about 6,000 feet, and there's a light northwesterly wind coming in at about 10 knots, and it's very dry, no sign of cloud here. Looking at the wind, this is at 2 o'clock, and we can see we've got the same pattern. The wind's coming in over the coast, over the peninsula and the Cape Flats, and turns around and onto our northern ridges, and it also comes in from the other side and runs into the southern ridges and Lungerberg Ridge out towards George. And looking at this one, we can see we've got wind speeds along that Lungerberg Ridge of about 8 to 12 knots, and similar maybe 6 to 10 knots on the northern side. If I go back one and look at the speeds over here, that light blue is actually just touching 6 knots, so 6 to 10 knots to the north. What we can see that's slightly different to yesterday, or today rather, is that this wind from the south and the wind from the west meet, but they're already inland by the time they meet, so we're not getting this dead area over the top of the ridge. This is at 2 o'clock, and we move on to 5 o'clock. You can see the wind is more pronounced and the dead area has moved even further inland. Just while we're here, wind along the Lungerberg is pushing quite nicely, 10 to 14, even 15 knots, and along the northern ridges towards Worcesterhook, Clanwilliam, it is, let's see, 8 to 10 knots, maybe 12 knots in places. So yeah, let's just see, I think I've missed one here. That's at 5 o'clock. You can see that the wind coming in over the peninsula and the Cape Flats has also picked up. It's quite southerly by the time it hits those frontal ridges, and it doesn't carry very much further south than, was that Baines Kloof? Was that the tunnel? I think Baines Kloof is about there. So yep, and then obviously some funny things happening in the valley, and this coastal wind spurting through the gaps in the mountains later in the afternoon, which will cause some convergence, or may cause some convergence. Looking at cloud, this is at 2 o'clock, and there's very little. You might just notice a few clouds popping up, but you won't be able to reach them. And further east, this is Mossel Bay. This is a long way east before we start seeing cloud forming on the ridge at 2 o'clock. And at 5 o'clock, we have this cloud in the valley, which is probably convergence at 6,000 feet, 6,500. And further out, we have low cloud, but this is right to the east of Mossel Bay. So I don't think we're going to go that far. There's no cloud on the task area. If there's no cloud, I like to look at the height of the inversion, the thermal tops, just to make sure we've got some thermals. And in the valley here, at 2 o'clock, we've actually got 6,000 feet. It's quite nice. You can go fly around there. It's a bit higher over here towards Rufisona in mountains. Tolbach Valley is a bit less. That green is still, I think, about 452 or thereabout, just over 5,000 feet. And that carries on up towards Worcesterhook and further down to the south. So no problem with thermals at 2 o'clock, and further out this light turquoise is about 5,000 feet. No problem there, and no problem here all the way up to Clanwilliam. Clava is a little bit on the edge of this forecast zone, so I treat it with a bit of caution. About 4,000 feet. Going out to 5 o'clock, we can see the effect of the coastal air spilling into the valley, but we still have some lift on the Porterville Ridge at probably just on 4,000 feet. Some in parts of the Worcester Valley and further east, it's still a little bit lower, maybe 3,000 at Swellendam. It's starting to cool down, so much as expected. Let's look at some soundings to get a better idea what's happening from the soundings. We'll try going east first. This is Robertson. 2 o'clock. You see the wind here is actually very light, but it's variable. It swings from a southeast to a pure west as you climb up through the thermic layer. But that thermic layer is quite high. 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock, Robertson. We have this southeaster coming in, a wind shear at about 4,500 feet, and you won't climb much higher than that because this is once again not quite following the adiabatic slope. So effective coastal air affecting Robertson by 5 o'clock. Swellendam, similar, that over 4,500 at 2, and cooling off and dropping below 4,000, 3.5 by 5 o'clock. Riversdale, similar, even lower. Herbertsdale, even lower. So out to the east, late in the afternoon, it's definitely going to cool off, and the ridges are going to get lower and normally slower. Going to the north, that's Tolbach at 2 o'clock. Once again, this is a 10 knot wind dropping to a slightly less than 10 knots due west straight onto the Witzenberg. 4,500 foot inversion layer that will light up nicely. 5 o'clock, some coastal air coming in here and messing things around, but still basically southwest. The Witzenberg should still work. Porterville looking nice at 2 o'clock, and it's gone quite southerly, but still thermic and steady wind up to over 5,000 feet, so that should still work nicely. Worcester Hook, it's quite westerly for Worcester Hook. The winds are light, so the thermic is there, and by 5 o'clock it's come around more southwesterly, which is the right direction for that ridge. Wind speeds are actually picking up, and there's still some thermic, enough because it's a low ridge. Clanwilliam, looking good, but the winds are a bit light, 5 knots here, and about 4,500 feet. 5 o'clock it's still working, southwesterly. The wind has got this southerly component coming in from the sea. Clava shows it light, but fairly steady breeze onto the ridge, only below 10 knots, so between around closer to 5 knots and 10, and some thermic. Not so sure about Clava, and then by 5 o'clock Clava looks a bit sad. So options to the north and to the east. The north will work later than the east. Much of a muchness which way we go. If you go perhaps east first and then north. Definitely options for a task tomorrow. Just getting back to a few other considerations. That's Worcester at 11 o'clock, and as you can see, the temperature now is about 27, 28 degrees, and the thermic layer is barely 3,000 feet. And we have a southeast breeze here, and above it, a northwest one. Now that's a bit early to start launching, and we have the same dilemma as to which way to grid. But by 2 o'clock, the north wind is coming through steadily, and the inversion layer is up to 6,000 feet, and the temperature has picked up to 32 degrees. So note, from here we go from 27 or 28 degrees to 32, 33 degrees. It's quite a big jump in temperature. So what you notice on the flight line is when the temperatures start picking up, that's the time to start getting moving with the launching. And I think my gut feel is once again to grid on 3-3. I'm not sure which runway they used today. I wasn't on the airfield, but we can discuss that with the organisers. Last one I got here. This is the boundary layer up, maximum up down motion, 5 o'clock in the valley, and you can see we've got these lines here, which normally is an indication of some convergence. So there might be some convergence in the valley in the late afternoon, which could be useful. I don't know. Depends what the task is. Guys, please fly carefully, and we're here to enjoy it, so definitely have fun. Thanks. Good night.